In the 2025 NFL season, the New York Giants finished with just 4 wins, which honestly wasn't surprising. Despite bright flashes from new additions like Cam Scadaboo and Jackson Dart, the lack of depth, experience, and constant injuries resulted in a familiar disappointment for Giants fans. We're talking about a team that heavily struggled in the secondary, struggled to establish a consistent offense, and at times just looked completely outmatched at the line of scrimmage. Week after week, the same issues showed up. Missed assignments, collapsed pockets, and drives ending before they even had a chance to develop. Some will blame coaching, most notably Shane Bowen, the former defensive coordinator. Others blame injuries, especially Malik Neighbors tearing his ACL week 4. Some point to individual players, as any team starting Deontay Banks is bound to get fried. And sure, those explanations make sense, but they're also incomplete, because if you want to understand how the Giants got here, how all these decisions, all these patterns, and all these failures came together, you have to go back. Further than Kadarius Toney, further than Eli Apple. No, we have to understand the events that occurred over 2,000 years ago during the Peloponnesian War. In the 5th century BC, the Greek world was dominated by 2 powers, Athens and Sparta. Athens was a democratic, wealthy, naval empire influencing all of ancient Greece. It was the center of philosophy, art, and political thought. Sparta was the opposite, as it was built entirely on discipline and warfare. It was rigid and militaristic. For nearly 30 years, these 2 powers fought for control of the Greek world. The Athenian navy controlled trade, and its empire brought in resources from across the region. At this time, Athens seemed untouchable, but then, things began to unravel. A devastating plague swept through Athens, killing a huge portion of its population, including key leadership. And then came the Sicilian expedition. Athens launched a massive invasion across the sea and lost everything. Ships, soldiers, commanders. It was a catastrophe. Meanwhile, Sparta adapted. With Persian support, it built a navy and slowly gained the upper hand. And eventually, in 404 BC, Athens surrendered. The impact of the Peloponnesian War wasn't just political, but it was also philosophical, because for the first time, people began to seriously question something fundamental, the rationality of humans. The historian Thucydides didn't just document the war, he analyzed it. In his writings, he discovered fear, overconfidence, and bad decision-making on both sides of the war. Athens wasn't defeated because it lacked power, it was defeated because it made bad decisions. Panic during the plague, internal instability, and overconfidence in Sicily. And this idea that humans aren't perfectly rational would echo through philosophy for centuries. Figures like Plato would later react to this instability and question whether democracy itself could be trusted. The conclusion wasn't comforting. He found people are biased, people follow trends, and people make bad decisions based on incomplete information. Athens didn't just lose a war, it lost its position as the cultural and intellectual center of the Greek world, and that changes everything. After the war, Greece didn't recover, it fractured. Sparta couldn't maintain control, and other city-states rose and fell. Eventually, a new power emerged, Macedon. Under Philip II, and later during Alexander the Great's conquests, Greek culture spread across a massive empire. But this wasn't the same Greece. This was a Greece shaped by war and decline. And this version of Greece is the one Rome would inherit. By the 2nd century BC, Rome expanded into the Greek world during the Roman conquests of Greece. But Rome didn't just conquer Greece, it absorbed it. Greek philosophy, art, and education became central to Roman elite life. But again, this wasn't a perfect transfer. Rome wasn't inheriting a golden age, it was inheriting something they already altered. And along with art and education, Rome inherited something else. A way of thinking about decision-making, the idea that humans could be studied, that behavior could be understood, and that systems could be built to guide these choices. But these systems were built on flawed assumptions that were shaped by war and instability. And small changes, over long periods of time, don't stay small. Over centuries, these differences build up, and eventually, like all empires, the Roman Empire falls. The fall of the Western Roman Empire reshapes Europe completely. Borders shift and new kingdoms rise, leaving a fragmented Europe. Out of this fractured Europe, new powers emerged, creating a ripple effect spanning over 1,000 years. Eventually, they cross the Atlantic, and colonization begins. They explore, compete, expand. The 13 colonies have had enough of the taxes, and through the American Revolutionary War, the United States is born. But like everything else in this timeline of the Peloponnesian War, it's just slightly different. Different foundations and different identities. But those differences don't stop at politics. They shape culture, they shape sports, and they shape how decisions are made. American football evolves over decades, built on strategy and adaptation. In particular, one of the hardest positions to evaluate becomes the offensive line. Do you prioritize size, athleticism, technique? Teams have been trying to answer this question for decades, and they don't always get it right. Modern NFL scouting relies on a fundamental assumption that humans can evaluate talent objectively, that they can be good decision makers without bias, that future predictions can be predicted accurately. But history suggests otherwise. The same patterns seen in ancient Greece still exist today. I'm talking about overconfidence, trend following, and bandwagon. By the modern era, the system has its own biases. Certain programs become pipelines to the NFL. Programs like University of Alabama consistently produce top prospects. And over time, a pattern emerges. If you pass the eye test, you're going to be valued highly. Sometimes, regardless of what actually shows up on film. At some point, evaluation becomes pattern recognition, and pattern recognition is just bias. Eventually, this all leads us to one moment. A moment so devastating for the city of New York. Its consequences will be felt eternally.
With the 7th pick in the 2022 NFL Draft, the New York Giants select Evan Neal, tackle, Alabama.
The events that occurred in ancient Greece fractured our timeline. The 7th overall pick, a pick so valuable, was used on Evan Neal. Neal began to struggle right off the bat, cementing his legacy as a bust. And from there, the effects ripple forward. Protection issues persist, offensive struggles continue, and the 2025 season ends with just 4 wins. But thankfully, the timeline doesn't stop there, because in response, teams adapt. The Giants hired a decorated coach in John Harbaugh and added great players like Isaiah Likely and Tremaine Edmonds. Even though the Giants only had 4 wins last season, there were a lot of bright flashes. They kept up with some of the best teams in the league, often only losing by 1 score despite the injuries. These flashes, along with the new additions, allow Giants fans to remain optimistic for 2026. And all of these changes are a part of a constantly shifting football ecosystem, shaped by history and how humans think and decide. And that is how a war in ancient Greece didn't just lead to the modern NFL, but it shaped the way decisions are made within it, created Evan Neal, and helped define the trajectory of the New York Giants. Historians won't tell you this, but the very moment the Athenian army laid down their gear is the very moment that made the failure of the New York football Giants inevitable.